Welcome to Skill Builder. I'm Robin Clevitt. I'm back on the Capel build and I'm just at the point where I'm going to run all my door linings in preparation to hang all the doors. Now, generally speaking, a door lining is a first fix item. In my case, because I've tape and jointed, I'm doing this as a second fix item so I can fit the door frame, hang the door, put the architrave and skirting on all in one go. Now, the reason I tape and jointed is it's a lot less messy. I've got a very modern house. It's very flat, lovely flat walls. It just lent itself to tape and jointing. So you can see my floors are nice and clean. There's no plaster everywhere, just how I like it. So next to me, I have all of my door linings and they're in about 5 different sizes. The reason for the size differences is basically some of the walls are CLS with 12.5 plasterboard either side. Then you've got some which have got an OSB sheathing in between that as well. Some have got OSB sheathing both sides as well, which gives you this various different widths. Now, I often use softwood door linings, the type that you find in all major builders merchants. But the trouble with those they are a standard width, which is generally 4¼ inches or 5¼ inches. And that doesn't even suit modern stud work, which is what we call regularized, which means that when you put them in, the plasterer, instead of having 3 or 4 mil either side, he's got 6 mil, and they start, having to sort of swing out to the door linings or bond it out around the door frames. So I avoid that. Also, I've used MDF, so it's a moisture resistant MDF, and I have all of these machined in the factory. And on the edges, I have a MDF preparation tape. Now what this means is, instead of that really furry edge you get when you paint the edge of MDF, it eliminates that completely and it gives you a really crisp corner as well. So it actually looks like a really well painted piece of timber, and it's ideal for eggshell paint straight over the top. So it eliminates the need for priming on site, and there's no knots, so there's no knotting to do, and that bleeds through, and the knots sometimes dry and the wood cracks and all the rest of it. So it eliminates that. So I use 30 mil thick MDF. A standard door lining's around about 28 mil softwood, and I prefer the 30 mil because it's really rigid. So where I'm fixing a leg, for example, if I've got 5 fixing points, it's not moving around and swimming around too much when I do the initial fit. Some of the heads I sometimes trim down if the datums are a little bit wrong. I've had to do that in a couple of places. That's fairly normal. Now what I'm going to do to join these together is I'm going to do a butt joint with a domino and screws. So it's a really simple way of putting them together. I've got a table set up which I'll do all the dominoing first, all the piloting. I'll leave them dry, I'll put them all in the respective rooms, set the laser up, and then I'll use the laser to fine tune the legs. So when I say fine tune the legs, obviously the floor is going to be plus or minus 5 mil anywhere, and that just allows me to get it really tight to the floor. And when the floor coverings come in, sometimes the guys will come along with a multi-tool and trim out at the time just to let the floor sail underneath. So this is the way I've gone about it. It's going to be, for me, a quick way of going about it. There's no machining of timber to do on site apart from the joints. When I made all my heads, for example, this is for a 2'6" door. I talk in imperial because everyone seems to talk about doors in imperial. So this is a head, and if you've imagined you've got a leg here and a leg here, the distance between these are running dead flush, and the reason for that is because the domino is set up to run off the end and run against the end, and that will give me an exact flush joint. The distance between here is the door plus 2 gaps, so in my case 2 2p pieces. And the reason why I'm trying to set the lining exactly right is because the doors are all pre-finished, they're polished walnut. And the last thing I want to do is take a plane to the edge of those, because it means calling the French polisher in, he'll probably have to stain them and reseal them. So I want to eliminate that as much as possible here. So I'm going to make the first 5 door linings up. So here are the heads, here are the legs or the jambs. I'm using the Festool domino. Now I've had this tool a while and I've been doing a lot of roofs, so I haven't really been using it that much. But this is the ideal opportunity for me to put it through its paces. I've familiarised myself with all its different functionality. This isn't the latest model, incidentally, but what's really nice about it is it's going to cut me a tenon or a domino into the leg, into the head, and it's very straightforward in the sense that I need a centre line. That's all I need. And because it's got a little option on here which is exactly true, or it's +3 millimeters, my line only needs to be, you know, when you're doing a measure, I mean, you've got that bit on the end of the tape, so you've got to make sure you pulled it here. I've got 4.5, let's call it 2.25. That's all I need to be doing, because I know the tolerance built into this feature is going to give me the flexibility I've got to join them all together nicely. Now, my table here is basically made up so I can slot the heads down here. After using this a little bit, there's a couple of things I particularly like about it, and it's not necessarily all the amazing functionality that you expect from Festool and the build quality. But let's say, for example, when I'm doing these jams, this position of this knob is far enough forward that with your weight on there, the machine's well supported, but equally it's clamping it exactly at 90 degrees. So any shorter and the weight of this tool might set it sort of from being square. So this table that I'm working on here is nothing more than some old offcuts of the Eco joists I had left from when I was doing the building, a sheet of OSB and some offcuts of MDF, which is what I used in the kitchen area. Now, I'm a strong believer in, if you take the OSB, it's got a really good square corner. So I'm using that to my advantage. So when I'm putting my linings together, I can line them up with the edge, I can line the head up with the end, and so when I drill them, they're already somewhere near square. Because when you sort of glue these and screw these together, you want them to be somewhere near square. You don't want to get them pulling out of square. So little things like that I always find are a bit of an advantage, really. So I've got the table set up that I can make my liners, I can drill them all, brace them off, set them aside, and then we can go and fit them. So I've fitted the first lining, and the reason I've done this particular one here is right in the middle of the hallway, and from here I'm going to set all of my levels. Now I also identified that the floor at this point over the existing slab is at its tightest, so it's at its highest here, and that means that when I put the rest of them in, then I'll be able to get the linings in. If I'd have set this one low, I might be cutting too much off the others or not having enough. So I've also got a ply flush door here. This is just an off-the-shelf ply flush door, reasonably inexpensive, and the reason why I've done this is to set my tolerances up initially to make sure I was happy with all the component sizes. I bought this door with a view to swinging it. Let's open it again if I can. There we go. And also setting up the router jig. So for the sake of £30, this enables me to get everything set perfectly before I get one of those brand new polished walnut doors out of their packaging. The other thing that's really useful as well is when I fix my frames, I have a box section of aluminium here. Now this was an old window frame from the original building, and it's dead true, it's thick section. And what I can do with this is I can screw it to the side of the door frame through 3 screws, and it holds it absolutely perfectly straight. So when I'm doing my shimming and fixing my door linings back, it's not doing this, it's absolutely straight. Then unscrew it, screw it to the other side when I'm fixing that leg, and I'm fixing it where the stops will be. So the holes that I create, the 3 holes that I create, are never going to be seen. And that's just another little tip. If you've got a bit of this, don't throw it away, keep it, and you can use it in your favour. I have put my laser positioned at this point. Now, just before assembly of all of the linings, I will check that the jambs or the legs don't need anything taken off. So it's a very easy thing to do. I know that this is the head position to get them all exactly true. So I will bring the jambs round, or the legs, mark them, pop them on the chop saw, knock off anything that needs to come off, make the lining together, bring it round, stand it there, and it's ready to go straight in. And all I may need underneath is probably a little green shim or something like that, a millimetre shim, just to fine tune it and get it exactly as I want it. So I have a lot of these linings put together. I want to square them up and I want to brace them before they go in. Now every carpenter has his own way of doing this. He may have been taught that basically you just mark a section of timber, the top width, you set it parallel down the jambs, somewhere around about 300 millimeters up. You attach it on the face, and then you'll measure, or with a pinch rod, and you'll do your diagonals. So, as I mentioned, I bought this door just to set all of my tolerances up with. So in my case, I will make all the linings around this door. I've got parallel shims to one side, and that represents the 2 gaps, so the gap either side. And that's perfectly square. This is a manufactured door, perfectly square. So I'm happy. I can brace it here, remove the frame, and it takes minutes as opposed to several minutes. That's my way of doing it. So you may have also wondered at the fact that I've got all this little production line going, why aren't I doing my route outs for my hinges as I go? Now the simple reason being is, in my case, there's 5 different width of lining. That doesn't affect the setting up of the jig in any way, but what it does mean is that the lining would need to have to be relative to where the door position is, and I can either do a plan and work all that out, then number everything, but that actually would add time to it. The idea of this jig is, once you've got your linings in, you can go to your client and say, right, the door is shown opening this way on the drawing. Is that the way you want it? Because I can assure you, if it's on the drawing and you do it that way, a client might come in and say, why is the door hanging that way? And if you've done if you've pre-routed everything out, you've got to fill them, or you've got to take your lining apart or put a new lining in. So I always think it's safest to get your linings in one go, and then go around with the client, mark the hinge side and clarify all that, and then you've got no problems in the future.